Will the killing of Alex Pretti and the mass protest movement in the Twin Cities chasten Trump and stop, restrain ICE's worst abuses?
The conditions are changing, but is the larger project going to change? I'm highly skeptical.
The administration seems to be slightly stepping back. It has sent Tom Homan in to replace Gregory Bovino.
Bovino seems to be doing his best to actually embody the Sean Penn character in the movie One Battle After Another.
The guns went off and it was a starter pistol for lying.
And everybody could see that.
And libel. And libel. Hello and welcome to the Slate Political Gabfest, January 29th, 2026, the de-icing edition. I am David Plotz of CityCast in Washington, D.C., icebound, literally icebound, on a kind of a raft that is my house, pinned in ice the way Ernest Shackleton's boat was pinned in ice. From New Haven, Connecticut, the New York Times Magazine, Yale University Law School, Emily Bazelon. Hello, Emily.
Hello, hello.
And from New York City, where he's just launched a new podcast about aircraft carriers, battleships, and submarines. It's called Naval Gazing. John Dickerson.
It's so funny. Lots of people have spelled it navel gazing with A-L, and that's very funny. Hi. We are also encased in ice and snow here up in New York.
I have only left my house in the last few days to walk my dog. Like, that's it.
I left my house to go to Chicago, which was talk about frying pan into fire or whatever the
the opposite is.
Of that is.
Igloo into ice flow.
This week on the Gabfest, will the killing of Alex Pretti and the mass protest movement in the Twin Cities chasten Trump and stop, restrain ICE's worst abuses? Then ISIS raids and Pretti's killing created a constitutional cognitive dissonance for conservatives around the First, Second, and Fourth Amendments, maybe even the 10th, too. We'll talk about that. Then we will talk to Jason Zengerle about his vivid new biography of Tucker Carlson. Plus, we'll have cocktail chatter. And a reminder that we have a live show coming up in D.C. on Wednesday, February 11th. We are going to be live at 6th and I here in Washington. You'll be able to get access to 6th and I. The roads will be clear. And we're going to be with Jamie Raskin, the brilliant Democratic member of Congress from Maryland. And we're going to talk about what is going on in the world. And we'll talk about, I'm sure, a lot of Trump stuff and other things as well. It's part of our 20th anniversary tour. Come join us at 6th and I on February 11th at 7:30. Slate.com/Gabfest Live DC for tickets. Slate.com/Gabfest Live DC.
I hope next year we do 1 year anniversary of our 20th anniversary tour live shows.
And then we can do a 6-month tour, 6-month anniversary of our 1 year tour. And eventually it can like Zeno's Paradox, where we'll be nothing but on tour the whole time.
Or like Bob Dylan.
Exactly. God, I don't know if I'm going to make it. Or Mick Jagger. Those guys are all taking some sort of weird extract of young nymphs that I don't know that is available to us.
I don't think I want it to be available.
The killing of Alex Pretti has shocked the nation like I would say nothing since the death of George Floyd in the same city 6 years ago. You have seen the videos of this unwarranted and shocking killing, and it has accelerated the mass protest movement within the Twin Cities to disrupt ICE's theatrical, brutalizing, masked raids in that area. And it's even splitting Trump supporters who are increasingly uneasy about the tactics on display and at least slightly discomfited by the lies that the administration, particularly Kristi Noem and Stephen Miller, have told about Pretti and about Renee Good, who was also killed earlier, another civilian killed under challenging circumstances, under ambiguous at best circumstances. The administration seems to be slightly stepping back from its maximalist, brutalizing position. It has sent Tom Homan in to replace Gregory Bovino as commander. It's suspended for the moment the two agents who shot Pretti, and it's engaging in at least civil conversations with the Democrats who lead the state. So, John, is this in fact a turning point in the ICE assault in the Twin Cities? Have we reached peak misery there? And if so, why was this the bridge too far?
I think we have. Tom Homan on Thursday morning said that ICE is going to be drawing down in Minneapolis, and so the retreat is happening. But we've seen lots and lots of instances in which President Trump is claimed to have drawn, softened or changed his tone on things, and then doesn't change them at all. I think with the specific respect to Minneapolis, the conditions are changing. But is the larger project going to change? I'm highly skeptical, and we can talk about what I really mean by the larger project, because I think the provenance of what ended up in these two killings, starts day one of this new administration.
What do you mean by the larger project? I mean,
I mean that from the beginning of the administration, whether it was Kilmer Abrego Garcia or the migrants sent to Seacoast prison in El Salvador, or Ramesa Ozturk, the Tufts graduate student who we learned this week was nabbed by ICE for essentially writing an op-ed, being one of four co-authors. At the time, the Secretary of State and DHS said, "Oh, we have other evidence that she supported Hamas." We learned this week. No, there's no evidence. And I got a much longer riff on this. But if from the start you are basically deciding you don't really need evidence, you are engaged immediately in fights with lots and lots of judges about due process. But basically your operating procedure is, we're going to do what we're going to do and, let the judges catch up with us. That plus habitual lying. I mean, what you described of the mischaracterizations in both the Good and the Pretti case, I mean, the guns went off and it was a starter pistol for lying. I mean, Kristi Noem and Stephen Miller and the president said things that weren't just lies, but they were absolute total fantasy fabrications.
And everybody could see that by
libel. And are any other circumstance an absolute libel of somebody to call them a terrorist?
And people might think, oh, well, that, of course they lie. And they sort of collapse into this cynical, oh, he lied again, which I think is incredibly corrosive, because you're talking about lying immediately and calling someone a terrorist who has just died. Right. So it's just ghoulish and inhuman, but also just from a strict, doing your job standpoint. First of all, we always know that these kinds of conflicts are complicated. You don't want to talk. The rules of the Justice Department say, don't say anything that you don't absolutely know for sure, because it messes with the case. And also, that there's going to be video out there. And we've talked about it before, and then I'll shut up, is the purchase price for giving people the power to, in some cases, kill other Americans is that they're going to abide by the laws, that they're going to stick within the guardrails of the enormous power that they've been given. And not lying, that's one of the things that you're not supposed to do when you've been given state power over other people's lives with firearms, with the kinds of orders that can put people in mortal danger.
So, Emily, Trump's immigration policy, by some measures, has been a phenomenal success.
The border.
At the border, it has stopped almost all migration to the United States, which there was a concern about, deeply unpopular as the chaos at the border and the kind of the way that was unfolding was an unpopular issue for Democrats. Trump's policies and the kind of absolutism and viciousness with which it's been carried out has been incredibly effective. And even deportations in themselves are not, people accept that there's some level of deportation that can take place, and that even internally in the country that people who are living here without authorization can be deported, and that's okay. But has Trump's immigration policy in general become an albatross because of what is happening with ICE, or is this just a temporary kind of unhappiness with just two Americans being killed, and then we'll get beyond that and people will be glad that the deportations are going on?
I mean, I think these totally unnecessary, deeply upsetting civilian deaths are the leading edge of why this is a huge problem. And by, I mean, to take a step back about Homan, like the idea that the guy who helped craft the family separation policy in Trump's first term and is accused allegedly of taking a $50,000 bag of cash, like that he's the better, sunnier alternative here is like a measure of where we are. However,
he is.
Well, he seems less interested in these sweeping raids where you come in and you descend on a city with thousands of Border Patrol agents, right? In addition to ICE. I mean, that was another, at least, John, were you going to say something? Sorry.
Well, I was going to say, Andy didn't take place, as Gregory Bovino, who was in charge previously, he didn't take place in the immediate smearing and slandering with obvious provable lies, and the way Bovino did, both in the case of Pretti, but also in several other cases as a federal judge.
Yeah, I mean, Bovino seems to be doing his best to actually embody the Sean Penn character in the movie One Battle After Another, and that is like shocking and upsetting. But I guess to talk about the shift of strategy here, it seems like, at least for the moment, and I agree with John, I don't expect this to hold, that the Homan strategy of trying to get cities and states to cooperate more with turning over people who are in jail. Right. They're not convicted of crimes. They may have just been charged with misdemeanors, but that would expand the pool of people who would be easier for ICE to snatch up and deport, and is less invasive than taking over a city the way we've seen, in LA and Chicago, but especially in Minneapolis, because Minneapolis is smaller. And so it just felt like it was crawling with federal immigration agents in a way that the bigger cities, I think, that wasn't quite achieved. I mean, maybe they still have this 3,000 person a day quota that they're supposed to make, which has, put enormous pressure on people to just on ICE and Border Patrol to just snatch up whoever they can. I mean, that's why we've seen this just like incredible cruelty. I do think that the images of, little kids and the idea that parents don't feel safe leaving their homes or letting their kids go to school or taking them, like, I think that is unsettling to more and more Americans. Whether they're going to have the same kind of outrage they have about these deaths is a different matter. I mean, there's no way we're done with that, because if you really are going to try to just deport, hundreds of thousands of people, it's going to be necessary to your strategy, because there aren't that many immigrants who even get arrested who could like make up these quotas. So I don't feel too sanguine about this shift, but I do think that the tactics are starting to make the poll numbers move against Trump in an important way.
Just before we go back to the politics, just in terms of the contributory factors, I was looking at the Pew Research Center data. There are 78 other U.S. metro areas with a higher concentration of unauthorized immigrants than Minneapolis. And so the blue state targeting that was a part of this, and you mentioned Tom Homan, that their argument has always been, hey, if these states would cooperate with us and give us access to their jails and do all of that, then we wouldn't have to go, house to house. Those are obviously not the only two alternatives in life, but that and also I think what's been demonstrated here that another one of these long tail things is the combination of the quota, which required hiring massive numbers of new agents, and a president who has for this term and the previous one extolled the virtues of rough treatment by authorities with the police or anybody else, including shooting shoplifters. I mean, the president has suggested this is good behavior, and so I think those are two other things.
Well, and I think that the agents carrying out on the streets can certainly hope for, but expect pardons at the end of this journey if they need them. There are barriers to charging and convicting them anyway, and we can talk about that too. But like, they can imagine that Trump would do that in the end for them, and that creates impunity along with everything else.
Yeah, I mean, but it's also a feeling. I mean, so impunity is something that's created by a sense that there are no consequences. It's also created by a culture that you build within an organization. It's much stronger. It's like you give people the feeling that A, they're embattled, A, they themselves are under threat. They are the ones who are in danger. I'm sure that if you talk to the ICE agents, they feel like they're the ones who are like at risk of being doxxed or at risk of who knows what, and that sense of besiegement allows them to act in these ways that are brutal and to rationalize it to themselves.
Super smart. I think that's right. And this will go into the ideological conversation we'll have, but I think that's the objective of calling Pretti a terrorist immediately, because when something awful happens, you can either bury the awful thing that happened or make the person to whom it happened into one of these terrible figures. And in this case, is trying to tie it into this idea of being constantly under siege, either under siege as an ICE officer or the larger siege that has been presented, which is that America is under siege from an army of illegals that are a part of a democratic scheme to replace Americans and retain power.
Right. And just to play out the conservative lens on this a little more, I mean, it is true that it can be within the bounds of the law to deport an enormous number of people because we've never had comprehensive immigration reform. And so we do have all these people who are undocumented. The fact that Trump, revoked the temporary visa protections that Biden given to hundreds of thousands of people, basically converted them into legal residents, from legal residents into illegal residents. And so, you can say to yourself, like, I'm the law-abiding person. My side is the one trying to enforce the law here. And these sanctuary cities like Minneapolis and, Democratic officials who are urging on the protests, they're the ones who are lawless. And that is a kind of tension in the sanctuary cities movement and in this kind of right versus left dynamic.
Okay, I want to get to that in a second. I want to actually phrase a question for you guys around that in 1 second. But first, I want to note, I think one of the most interesting things about this whole period of a couple of weeks is there are 4 defining images that have been so powerful. There were the video images of the killing of Renee Good and the killing of Alex Pretti. Those 2 are just unbelievably powerful. Then there's the photograph of Liam Ramos, the 5-year-old boy, in his Pikachu hat, and just the idea of this child, this who could not be more innocent, being snatched and used as bait, I think just made so many of us feel deeply sick just at the sight of that. And then the image of an ICE agent unleashing chemical irritants directly into the face of someone who was helpless, literally being held down and defenseless, someone who had been protesting. Those 4 images, I think, are, if this turns out to be an Edmund Pettus Bridge moment or a Bull Connor moment, those 4 images will be iconic.
The John Locklear Associated Press picture of Thomas Gibbons Neff in the Times writes a great piece about, it's a picture essentially of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 ICE agents at a woman's door. She's holding her cell phone, looking out at them from the threshold of the doorway, and they are all armed to the teeth, facing her. And the Times piece is about how all the weaponry they have is the weaponry of basically hand-to-hand combat in Iraq.
Just to go to the political question. So I think there are 2 interesting political questions that Democratic officials face. One is the one you were just touching on, Emily, which is how much should Democratic officials and police departments that are in cities that Democrats control politically, how much should they cooperate with ICE on these things around people who have been arrested or detained for other matters or being held by the city? Should they be cooperative, and to what extent? That's number one. Second question is, there is an emerging abolish ICE movement in the Democratic Party, and a lot of people, I'm sure, are hearing echoes of a defund the police and are having kind of angina.
And an earlier abolish ICE movement, which did not go well.
And yes, but there's a bit of angina that's being caused in I'm sure, Rahm Emanuel right now. What should Democrats do to channel that feeling without allowing themselves to be saddled with an absolutely terrible political position to hold?
I feel like I'm not sure what the political answer is to how much cities should withhold cooperation, except that obviously in liberal parts of the country, there's more and more anger and a feeling that these tactics no. And so, there's no way this was ever a good faith effort to get the cities and blue states to, hold on to people with ICE detainers as they come out of jail. But that one imagines that even if that would possibly ease these sweeping raids. Like, if you trusted the Trump administration for 1 second on that, there's just going to be less appetite for it. So there's that dynamic. I mean, I am someone who thinks that abolish ICE is not a political winner by any means. I do think that the incredible budget increase for ICE and the Department of Homeland Security, which was part of Trump's, quote, big, beautiful bill, unquote, just like is staggering. And I was not sufficiently aware of it as that was happening. So this discussion in Congress right now about a partial shutdown of the government to try to put some constraints on that, like, I see the virtue of it. I don't really think...
to interrupt there, Emily, there's a great piece in your Times today just pointing out that this massive increase for ICE and CBP, it's on the order of $130 billion between the two departments over the next 3 years, and there are literally no congressional oversight, no instructions about how the money can be spent.
Crazy.
So ICE can do whatever it wants with the money.
It's a 400% increase in the ICE detention budget, among other things.
Yeah, like, how did this happen without bigger headlines? I don't know.
I think, because think back to, which I think it gets at what David's getting at, which is like, this was a signature failure of the Biden administration, the overrunning of the U.S. immigration system. And Donald Trump was elected in large part, if not in the major part, to try to get a handle on this. And before these events in Minneapolis, and you could also add, I think, some of what started in Chicago, politically, it was early, obviously an easy vote for a Republican, but also for Democrats, for the reason David put forward. We're not going to get in the way of this and associate themselves with arguably one of Joe Biden's worst policies, which is his immigration measures. So it all looks different in retrospect, but at the time, I can see, it seems to make sense that it went total. I mean, it's not good to have no congressional oversight. And by the way, it's continuing. Chuck Grassley was asked, chairman of the Judiciary Committee, was asked if ICE agents should be able to go into houses without a judicial warrant. And he said, ask a constitutional lawyer. I'm a farmer.
Yeah. Also the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee.
Yes. I mean, and I think that's a contributory factor that goes back a while, which is the sort of, oh, I didn't see the tweet, or, oh, I didn't watch that or see that. The idea that it is central to your job, not to mention the fact that most members of Congress pop off about any issue. It's central to your job to have views about, say, the Fourth Amendment. But when it gets uncomfortable to just go, oh, I didn't see the tweet, or I'm a farmer, I think that it created the conditions we're in now anyway. But sorry, go back to ICE funding.
So I don't know if this will happen or not, but if I was scripting for the Democrats, I would pick some specific things that you could limit this kind of enforcement. I would pick the masks, the lack of identification. I feel like Congress could make a rule about that. And some states are trying to do this as well. I mean, that could make a difference in terms of the impunity and what it feels like to have this like invading force. You could require judicial warrants, which I already think are required by constitutional law, but there's nothing stopping them from also putting that into a statute. And then you could set limits on what, are being known as Kavanaugh stops, these stops that are just like, you look Hispanic and you have an accent, and maybe you're standing at a Home Depot in line. Maybe you're not. Like, the ICE agents are saying now, I'm asking you for your papers because of your accent. And Congress could say that that is a civil rights violation and a form of discrimination and address it directly.
John, just to close this part of the conversation around this issue, right now, of course, what is happening in the Twin Cities is incredibly tense. It's increasingly unpopular. The protest movement has been carried out masterfully by the people of the Twin Cities. It has been, just brilliantly done, peacefully. I mean, at the cost of 2 deaths. But there's no doubt that the way that the protests have been carried out and the kind of clarity of it and the innocence of the protests has brought to light for Americans how damaging this is. I think, Emily, your point about the density of Minneapolis and the density, the thickness on the ground of ICE officials has made that city, just made it clear to people how this feels like an invasion in the city. So for the moment, this definitely feels like a political winner for Democrats. Broadly, immigration has been a bad issue for Democrats for a long time. Should they avoid getting eating this sugary snack right now? Should they avoid getting involved and sort of becoming obsessed with fixing what's wrong with ICE, and instead keep focused on the things that seem to really win for them, which are these affordability issues in particular?
I think it might be false choice. So I don't know.
I always set up false choices. That's my goal.
So no, and I take the super easy
door 3
road
for
of
John
doing
Dickerson.
That. Not exactly accepting the frame of your question, but I think you're. So just to give you, I think we've developed, and I think what has been true about the immigration question politically since Donald Trump came back into office is that people were behind the idea, not behind the execution. So now a YouGov poll shows only 39% of Americans approve of Trump's handling of immigration, and 58% say ICE has gone too far. So I think that for anybody seeking to run against Republicans or take advantage of this moment politically, I think there's a strong argument for what the polling has shown is that public opinion in America is with the idea, but not with the execution. So I think that, Democrats can't, I think abolish ICE has some difficulties. I think they have brand new images of an America that people look at and go, is this my country? And they are shocked. And in politics, the most recent image is more powerful than people's recollections of how things might have been under Joe Biden. But I think that what is problematic and challenging for the president is not only does the storyline of overreach fit neatly with his everyday behavior, but on the question of the economy, there's a Fox poll that shows 80% of Americans are disappointed in the way Trump has handled. It's independent voters, not Americans. 80% of independent voters disapprove of Trump's handling of the economy. The consumer confidence level is the lowest since 2014, performing worse than during any point in the COVID-19 pandemic. So you have confidence in ICE declining, approval of the president on immigration bad, and perhaps the key storyline of this election is that voters are saying, hey, wait a minute, we elected you to handle prices and the economy, and you're not doing the job. So I think they are actually slightly combined. But in the end, the consumer questions and the economic questions are probably smart for any politician trying to get elected or reelected.
If you polled conservatives about what their most popular amendments are, what amendments they loved most, they probably would say the second and the fourth. The second and the fourth are really popular amendments on the right. And yet what Trump has been doing in the Twin Cities, and particularly with what ICE has been doing, runs absolutely contrary to what conservatives have said about those amendments historically. It is safe to say that if Democrats had been treating the Second and Fourth Amendments the way Trump has been treating the Second and Fourth Amendments in the Twin Cities, there would be a apoplectic reaction on the right. As it is, there is just mild yelping. So, Emily, how have the Second and Fourth Amendments been undermined during Operation Metro Surge?
Well, I mean, for me, like fingernails on a chalkboard, part of this was Kash Patel, the director of the FBI, and other Trump officials, and Trump saying that basically Pretti was to blame for his death because he, quote, brought a gun into a protest.
And can I just jump in there and go, he wasn't even at a protest.
Exactly. He didn't walk into a protest. He was on a street. Things are happening in this spontaneous way in Minneapolis. Also, however, I do recall spending some time talking about how, militias in states like Michigan and Virginia were bringing guns to protests on the State House steps because that's how gun rights work in their states. And, Minnesota in its law makes a key distinction between carrying a firearm and brandishing a firearm. And we all know from that video that Pretti's gun was in its holster. He never put his hand near it the whole time in that altercation. So that is just like kind of amazing. And then the Fourth Amendment part, we talked about a little bit already, but basically the Trump administration is claiming the power to issue what are called administrative warrants, which means that the the agency, DHS, decides if they're going to come in and search your house, rather than going to a judge who signs off on the idea that there's probable cause for this search. And that is just a deeply intrusive, and I would say at this point, like, un-American way of thinking about one's rights, one's protections against an unreasonable search and seizure, which is the text of the Fourth Amendment.
Can we actually start with this Fourth Amendment issue, because I think it's a little bit more nuanced and complicated. I mean, the sort of image, the jackbooted thugs, jackbooted masked thugs can break into your home without a warrant and take you, seize anyone they want. It is the theory, which of course is what conservatives have been warning about for decades. The jackbooted,
I believe that is Wade LaPierre's phrase, right?
I mean, like the ICE agents are wearing jackboots and they are masked. I mean, it's like incredible. So they're this image of an American citizen whose name I've now forgotten, in his underwear being pulled out of his home. Just shocking images of this. So is it clear that this is unconstitutional?
Yes, I think it is already clear this is unconstitutional. And I don't think that the Supreme Court has ever signed off on anything like this. The excuse for it is that this is immigration enforcement. And so that's like in its own lane, separate, siloed from the rest of constitutional law. Of course, the obvious flaw of that is that you don't actually know whether you have the right person and you're in the zone of immigration enforcement. If you're relying on your own information and you never ask the judge to look at it, there's going to be more likely that you're making mistakes, which is exactly what we saw with that arrest and detention that you were talking about, David. And so, you know, the key move here is that the Trump administration relied on the idea that undocumented people don't have the same rights as citizens to kind of other them and make us like get used to these extreme tactics. But now, of course, they're slopping onto American citizens because that was totally inevitable. And the most, you know, obviously like lethal examples are the deaths of Renee Good and Alex Pretti, but all these other citizens who are getting snatched up and treated in this incredibly rough and invasive way, they are also like collateral damage to this theory of the case.
But so the theory would be, though, that actually if you had epistemological certainty that somebody was not in the country legally, you would have the right to that they have no home protection at all, and the only risk is that the only problem is that you might incidentally hit an American when you did this, and therefore you can't do it because the risk of hitting an American is the issue? Or is it that people who are undocumented also have rights not to be invaded in the place that they're sleeping?
I mean, I don't think the Trump administration has really articulated its theory, but a theory would be that the Supreme Court has only squarely ruled that this is unconstitutional in cases that don't involve immigration enforcement. And so you're kind of going into an unsettled crack in the law and asserting this giant exception to how we think about the Fourth Amendment.
And just to give us a reminder of what would happen if this, or what is happening, is that ICE decides what it wants to do, and then judges come along in the process and say, no, you've overstepped here, or you can't do this here or there. And as the chief federal judge in Minneapolis wrote, I guess Wednesday, Patrick, is it Schillitz, that ICE had blown off the federal court orders, 100 court orders, nearly 100 court orders, had been violated. And he said that ICE had disobeyed more judicial directives in January alone than, quote, some federal agencies have violated in their entire existence.
And that's not even having to do with these warrantless, because these warrantless things are taking place in advance. There's no judicial order stopping them from doing it. They're just going ahead and doing it.
Yeah, it's a real big swirl of mess. I mean, basically what we're seeing here over and over again is what you started off with, John, which is the idea that the Trump administration barrels ahead and asks judges, or doesn't ask them, like dares judges to keep up with them. And then you have these, I think, clearly unconstitutional gaps that get exploited.
But you know what's happening? Actually, we didn't even get to this, is because of the fact so much of this is being filmed. There's so many images now, like they can't get away with nearly as much as they would if in a world without these ubiquitous surveillance by the public. And that is what the people of the Twin Cities have accomplished, and the journalists in the Twin Cities, is they've surveilled everything, and so that you get to see vividly as a citizen, as a consumer of media. Oh my God, they did that.
Right. And then you get to see what some people would say was a knowable outcome of hiring these kinds of people in your administration. But remember that the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, during the campaign was, had a moment in the barrel because she wrote a biography about her life in which she said she'd met Kim Jong-un, which of course she hadn't. And her felicity in somehow getting past that lie was not a bug, but a feature. And now we see her talking to Jake Tapper and asserting, despite multiple videos that showed the exact opposite, that Renee Good had purposefully driven her car to try to attack these agents. So that also is another contributing factor that allows this sort of impunity, and like law can't stop us, video can't stop us, conscience can't stop us. And that's what I think is at play with the conflict, David, you're talking about between the longstanding views about guns. In a case where you need to, you can embroider around it.
So let's get to that, John. Do you think there will be any consequence for the administration and for how they carry out their work from this kerfuffle around Alex Pretti having a gun and then the administration trying to blame him for his own death for having the gun, even though in all other circumstances they applaud that kind of self-arming?
No, I don't think so. I think that what ends up happening is that the cognitive dissonance among supporters of the president is solved by saying, well, yeah, but this is immigration and these people are trying to take over our country and it's a part of a Democratic plot to stop, have all these illegals vote. And I mean, sometimes you got to, crack some eggs when you make an omelet. And this guy was kicking the taillight of an ICE van 11 days earlier. He's no saint. I think there's an easy route to solving the cognitive dissonance, which, as you point out, I went back and looked at an interview I did with Ben Carlson when he was running for president in 2015. He wrote a book and he talked about why it's necessary to have a strong Second Amendment. And we went around and around a few times because his assertion was that the federal government is basically on the balls of its feet, ready to invade U.S. cities. And the constraint against that is not necessarily people will actually take to arms and fight them when they come in. It's that just the mere possession of having a weapon at home keeps the government from even thinking about it. So it has this, and that is a crucial and necessary part of American democracy. I mean, so this was a fundamental view that used to be held.
And will be held again once a
Democrat once a Democrat is president.
Yeah.
Now we've got jackboots. Now we need jackboots. Everyone needs jackboots.
But it is worth lingering on because when you think about it, the Republican Party used to be the party of free trade, gone. The Republican Party used to be the party that said personal behavior and character determine what you were like in public office. And even the suggestion of certain kinds of behavior made you unqualified. That's gone. Used to not believe in letting Russia invade countries. That's gone. You would have thought that the Second Amendment, which was the most deeply and strongly held view, would have been impervious. And that seems to have to be falling as well.
There was some mild yelping, as I said. There's mild yelping. The NRA spoke up about it.
Can we talk about one more thing, which is the real concern that no full independent investigation of Good or Pretty's death is really on the table? I just am really frozen in place about this. So what has happened so far in both these cases is that the Justice Department has not opened, and in fact, in Good's case, shut down a civil rights investigation. And this is the idea that usually what happens when the police kill someone, and most of the cases are about state and local police rather than federal agents, the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department comes in and under a law that dates all the way from 1866 asks whether the victim's civil rights were violated by the unreasonable use of force of the officer. That is not happening this time. Instead, there's going to be a much narrower inquiry into just whether the use of force is in line with the training standards for immigration agents. In Pretty's case, it's only going to be the Department of Homeland Security that investigates. The FBI, DOJ, they said, this is all yours. And meanwhile, the state and local authorities, who in a kind of, role reversal would be the ones you would trust to do the full and independent investigation, they are begging for access to the evidence in both of these killings and being completely blocked. So they have actually gone to court in a lawsuit that is based on the 10th Amendment. That's states' rights. Another, erstwhile dearly held conservative cause, which now Minnesota and the local prosecutor in Minneapolis are trying to invoke in order to just be able to look at the evidence so that they could try to investigate. And, what is really shocking about this is not necessarily whether either of these agents who committed these killings are going to go to prison, right? Like, that's far down the line. It is hard to convict people. Federal agents have extra immunity, for better or worse. But the idea that there would be no truth, no full accounting, no report from the government of what happened that Americans can have real trust in, that is just a real breach that we haven't seen in a killing like this, since before the 1960s. It's a really long time ago that we lived in a world where we didn't have an independent entity who had a kind of sense of impartiality and trust from the public to go in and really try to find out what happened. And that is just an enormous, staggering loss that we're all going to be feeling for a long time. So sorry for that speech, but yeah.
That felt like a cocktail chatter. That felt like a typical Emily Bazelon cocktail chatter.
It was connected to the topic this time. Plus, I'm writing about it this week, so it was all in my mind.
Hated by all the right people, Tucker Carlson and the Unraveling of the Conservative Mind is a new biography of one of the most interesting, controversial, difficult, awful people of the modern era, Tucker Carlson. It's by Jason Zengerle, a staff writer at The New Yorker, longtime great journalist of America. Jason, welcome to the Gabfest.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
I suspect that all of us on this call had some version of this experience, which is we knew Tucker Carlson back in the 90s, early mid-90s, found him charming, raffish, a little bit wicked, funny, a good writer, but just kind of in the gang around. And then all of a sudden you wake up and he is Charles Lindbergh. He's the most powerful, awful, to repeat that word, person in journalism. How did that happen?
You should read the book. There were, it was sort of gradual, and then it was kind of all of a sudden. I think it started with, I think he realized maybe earlier than a lot of people, including myself, that print was a dying medium. He was a really good magazine writer, like you said. He was the Weekly Standard. He wrote for Talk, for Tina Brown. He wrote for Esquire. He really wanted. I think he sort of modeled himself on like George Plimpton or Tom Wolfe or someone like that. But he recognized that he wasn't going to be able to have the kind of career that those people had, especially in terms of status and power and fame, that print just didn't offer that anymore. So he went into television and he went into cable news, and he had a rocky road there for a while. And there were, I think, a number of instances that kind of were, inflection points for him. And, I think one that kind of set him down this path was when he was the host of Crossfire, and Jon Stewart famously came on the show and just humiliated him. Jon Stewart was a real critic of Crossfire, attacked the show itself, saying it was destroying America, this kind of professional wrestling, fake political debate. And Crossfire at the time had a studio audience, and Jon Stewart goes on and starts attacking Tucker and attacking Paul Begala, who was the liberal host. And Paul Begala just kind of like sat back and didn't say anything. Tucker kind of rose to the challenge and tried to debate Stewart, and Stewart just destroyed him. And he called Tucker a dick, and like the studio audience just like erupts and cheers, and it couldn't have been worse. And soon after that, Crossfire was canceled. Tucker was let go from CNN. He wandered over to MSNBC for a while. That didn't really work out. He left there. I think that sort of fostered a sense of resentment on his part that, against, especially, like you said, he was a member of the club, and he remained a member of the club. But I think in his mind, the club was not supporting him the way he wanted it to. I think he felt kind of abandoned a little bit by some of these people. And that was sort of a germ of, a seed of resentment was planted, and it really blossomed over time. So by the time Donald Trump comes along and Tucker becomes, this populist and starts railing against the elite media and elite politicians, I think there's some genuine resentment there on his part. So I think that's one step in the process. I mean, it's a multi-cause kind of evolution. I mean, there are others as well. He was a supporter of the Iraq War, and he was, in the early part of his career, he was kind of a mainstream conservative. He was, like a little libertarian and a contrarian, but he more or less followed the mainstream conservative line. I think he had personal doubts about Iraq, but he swallowed them, and he went along with it publicly, I think, for a couple of reasons. One, he had a good friend who was working for Scooter Libby and Dick Cheney and was telling him, their WMD. Number two, he was the conservative host on Crossfire, and you have to toe the party line in that job. And I think he was not really able to voice any doubts about it, because that show doesn't work if the conservative host is agreeing with the liberal host. But to Tucker's credit, he recognized the disaster that Iraq was, very early on. He went there to write an article about Iraq for Esquire, and came back only 9 months into the war, and came back and said, "This is a disaster. I'm embarrassed I ever supported this." And really, I think was one of the few pundits who supported the war who really grappled with, how they made that mistake and what else they might have gotten wrong. And, when he was working at the Weekly Standard, when he was kind of this mainstream conservative, I mean, one of the big projects of the Weekly Standard and the project of people like Bill Kristol and neocons, in addition to getting us into war in Iraq, one of their big projects was to excommunicate Pat Buchanan from the conservative movement. And Buchanan, of course, opposed Iraq. And after Tucker came to the realization that Iraq was a mistake, he, I think, started, he realized Buchanan had been right about Iraq. And I think he started, kind of reevaluating other things. Who are other people I, been told to hold in low regard? What have they been right about? He started to evaluate these other things. And that kind of primed him to be receptive to anti-immigration stuff, anti-free trade stuff, things like that.
That all sounds pretty rational, and I'm sure that you're right about that. I also just am slightly bewildered by the psychology that goes along with going over to the dark side, right? I understand the appeal, the making lots of money and being on TV and cutting, trimming one's sails or making decisions that are part of that world. But, in the last couple of years, and I guess going back to before he left Fox, I mean, first there's just the really intense attacks on various racial minority groups, in the most sort of ugly, racist way. And, lately the way he is blaming Jews for the world's problems is really above and beyond. And I think the misogyny is really a lot too. And so the idea that this prepster from this pretty normal Republican conservative white background could be so out there on the dark side with Nick Fuentes, where they're pals and kind of enabling and boosting each other. There's an edge to it that I just don't totally get.
Since he left Fox, he doesn't have that built-in audience anymore. So he needs to do and say things that will attract attention. And I think that feeds some of it. I mean, I think he was doing this in a subtler form on Fox, but now he doesn't have the guardrails anymore. So that's one part of it. But number two, I think he feels like he needs to say this stuff more bluntly, because that'll get people to tune into his podcast. I also think, look, he's a really sophisticated, he has a very sophisticated political radar and a professional radar. And I think, especially with Fuentes, that's a really good example. He picked this fight with Fuentes. He was attacking Fuentes. He was calling Fuentes, he called him a Fed, which is the worst thing you can say in that world. And then the second worst thing you can say is that he's gay. And he said Fuentes was this gay little kid in his parents' basement. And Fuentes returned fire, and they were having this, feud on their respective platforms. And through social media, you can kind of see what the response to this stuff is. And Fuentes was winning. I mean, he was beating Tucker in this fight. Fuentes' fans were, and a lot of conservatives were siding with Fuentes, not with Tucker. And I think Tucker has made the calculus that you cannot be successful in conservative media or conservative politics these days without the support of neo-Nazis, basically. And so he had Fuentes on as an olive branch. And I think the things he's saying, these statements that, are awful, I mean, they're calculated because he thinks that's where the energy is. Like, that's where the energy is in the conservative world. And I think he's skating to where he thinks the puck is going to be. And, honestly, if you look at the way he's kind of behaved for the past 10 years, he often hasn't been wrong about that. So he's a little bit of a scary bellwether in that respect.
Building off of that, what does the ecosystem look like? So here's somebody who was at Crossfire, which was, about as middle of the down the road part of the media ecosystem as it could be at the time that it was on. You have the Sunday shows, you have the cables, and you have Crossfire as a thing. Like, what is the ecosystem that he operates in now? And give us a little more on that idea about how basically you can't be successful unless you're either dog whistling or blowing the klaxon for the neo-Nazis.
Well, I think, when he got fired from Fox, obviously, I'm sure that was not something he wanted. But in hindsight, it might have been kind of a blessing in disguise because it gave him a head start in this sort of new, wild streaming world. Cable news is kind of dying. And
let me tell you about networks.
Yeah, I know. I was going to say. And it's this new paradigm with influencers and podcasts and streaming, and it's all individual based. There are no institutions anymore, and it's really kind of like a Darwinian struggle in that space. And I think that and he's adapted to it, I think, is better than anyone ever could have anticipated. I mean, I think the assumption when he got fired from Fox was that he was going to disappear the way, Bill O'Reilly disappeared. Like, without Fox, these guys are typically nothing. But Tucker, I think, was able to take advantage of the shifting landscape in media. So this world he's now entered in has become much more relevant. And then he also sort of figured out the rules, I think, pretty quickly, and how to sort of rise to the top of that, pretty like rough, sort of heap that's there. I mean, the thing that Tucker has always been very good at, and I use, not normatively, but what he's been successful at doing, and he did this at Fox and he's doing this now, is he's able to take, really fringe ideas, fringe stories that exist like on the far, 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 far right, and smuggle them into the mainstream and present them to a mainstream audience in a slightly more palatable way. And I think the best example is Great Replacement Theory, that he was able to get that on primetime in Fox and make that, I think, in a lot of respects, like kind of a mainstream conservative belief now. And, I would like to think that like the average, like the median 7-year-old Fox viewer, if they had encountered Great Replacement Theory on the Daily Stormer and it's like raw form, they would have been like, this is nuts. I don't like it. But then they see Tucker do it and, he like waters it down and, he's just like, it makes sense. How can you deny this? And they're like, yeah, that's right. And that's what he's continuing to do on his show. I mean, he's he waters it down a little bit less, but, I think especially these days, you probably don't have to water it down as much because I think people are primed to receive that.
I'm going to do John Dickerson and ask 2 questions in the guise of one. Number 1 is, did Tucker talk to you? Number 2 is, I have always feared about him since sort of late Trump 1 that he would run for office because he has, I feel, some of the same wicked charisma that Trump has. Is that a possibility?
So number 1, Tucker did not talk to me for the book. I think like many political reporters used to talk to Tucker a lot. Bob Novak had that phrase, you're either a source or a target. I think Tucker likes to be a source and doesn't want to be a target. So he said that Fox, he said he wanted to do it and he was going to try to convince Fox to let him do it, and Fox wouldn't let him do it eventually. And then when he was fired, I was like, hey, you can do it now. And he didn't respond to that. So he didn't talk to me for the book. Will he run for president or will he run for office? I don't think Tucker wants to just be a podcaster. Like, I think he has, an ideological project and kind of a vision for the country that is bigger than just a podcast. I don't think he's like Bill Clinton, though. I don't think he's someone who's wanted to be president all of his life. So like right now he has like a great situation because JD Vance is basically, they're in ideological lockstep and they're quite close, and JD Vance, there's no daylight between the two of them. So the only way I could see him ever running for office himself would be if Vance were to diverge from Tucker's ideology and there started to be some daylight between the two, or the second possibility, and I think this is actually probably more likely, if he concludes that JD Vance just isn't a good enough politician to get elected president. And if there wasn't another politician that he could, sort of become this, Rasputin-like figure towards or with, if there wasn't someone else, then yeah, I could see him doing it himself. Because I think you're right about the charisma and the entertainment value, and that's such a crucial factor in Trump's success. And and there are all sorts of politicians are going to come along and try to emulate Trump on policy, but they don't have his ability to hold people's attention. And I think Tucker's someone who does have that, and that was actually kind of the genesis of the book.
Can we go back to the feuding? Because I've been reporting some in this space for the Times. I was mostly watching like suspended FBI agents get into fights with each other and with Kash Patel and Chuck Grassley's office. And it's like, they're all like, it seems as an outsider, they're all like very aligned politically, but they have these like furious raging fights with each other. And I guess in some ways it makes total sense. It's like the fights on the left or over the future of the Democratic Party, that it's much more satisfying to take a bite out of someone who's you're mostly allied with, because they might care and the audience is going to respond. There's like some real friction there. Is that how you see what's going on in the right? Or is it really just like for sport and actually it's just generating audience and clicks?
I think it's both. I mean, I think some of it is the narcissism of small differences. I think there is like, that is real. But yeah, like part of it is, it's how people pay attention, and it's how people process politics now, the conflict, it's not dissimilar from Trump or any successful politician these, Gavin Newsom. Like, so much of politics now is just trolling that I think you end up inevitably and you troll people who are even aligned with you, because it's just a way to engage with them. And they're like no hard feelings, I think, in the end. I mean, and you see it come to politics. I mean, like the way JD Vance will not denounce Fuentes, who has said like not only the most awful things about JD Vance, but the most awful things about JD Vance's wife. And Vance won't take the bait. I mean, he said that one thing in 2024, and then I think he said one thing recently on a podcast that no one listens to. But when asked by mainstream reporters on prominent platforms, he won't go there. And I think that you kind of accept that they're going to hit you and they're going to take you on, and you let it go, because that's just kind of considered part of the game these days.
Speaking of part of the game, Jason, how much residual part of Tucker is there that David described earlier, which is like he's sort of in on the game? There was some reporting around the 2020 election that while he had one foot in Fox and his audience, and he had to keep them exercised about the president's lies about the 2020 election privately, and there's actually, I guess, emails to this effect, he was saying this is crazy and this is insane. He was in on the game. Where does that lie now? How much of this is true belief, and how much of it is what you got to do?
Yeah, I mean, that's I guess the question. Does he really believe what he's saying? Again, he didn't talk to me for the book. Even if he had, I don't know if there'd be a really good way to assess that. I think it's like anything. Even if it started out as a cynical pose, if you say it enough and you succeed and you're rewarded for saying it, I think it's kind of human nature. Inevitably, you would believe it. He's really also just completely. He lives in kind of an information bubble now. I mean, he is not a member of the club anymore. He left Washington D.C. Trump kind of made his life in Washington and his life in the media and political ecosystem, where he had a very distinct role for 2 decades. He was the invited skunk at the garden party. You would have Tucker to your dinner party in Washington because he would say something, kind of outrageous, but he's a fun guy, and, everybody could sort of, laugh and roll their eyes. And that act didn't work when Trump became president. So Tucker's life in Washington became really difficult, and he left, and he now lives on an island in Maine and an island in Florida, and he's traded in, Bill Kristol and David Brooks for Don Jr. and Theo Vaughn. That's sort of his social world now. And I think, does he believe what he's saying? I mean, I think the circles in which he travels, those beliefs are, I think reinforced. And I think he does. I think he, I think he really has, gone fairly mad in a way that's not that unusual for some, conservative pundits. I mean, in the book I read about Joe Sobran and, kind of the road he traveled from, being like William F. Buckley's protege to then like becoming a pretty hardcore racist and anti-Semite and getting fired from National Review and basically like being, excluded from polite society. And Tucker used to tell this joke when he was at the Weekly Standard. He would say that he had run into Sobran at like a suburban Denny's where Sobran was like sitting in a booth and he was like, had scraggly hair and dirty fingernails and he was holding court, but there was no one there. He was, holding court to no one. And, Tucker, I think you could sort of make the argument that he's kind of followed the same path, but like he's as influential as ever and he has a mass audience. And I think that says something significant about the decline of institutions, like the decline of gatekeeping and just what the public, at least one part of the public, wants these days.
I remember talking to Tucker about his island in Maine, 15, 20 years ago. And ever since he became a public demon, I've thought this island is somehow a metaphor. It's like this, he like it is untouched by the world. He gets to be whoever he wants there. And it's a kind of fuck the world place. And he, I don't know, it just somehow always, whenever I think of him as on that island, like enjoying saying terrible things about people and not having to bear the consequences of that or to actually have to live around other humans.
Yeah. I mean, and not to extend the metaphor, but like, that island, he used to be there 2 or 3 months a year, because he would just go there in the summer. And now he's there, I guess 6 months, but then he's on another island in Florida. So that's, the island metaphor he did use. Yeah.
It's a long way from Loughborough Road, which is like as central in the cocooned world of Washington as you could be, which is, I think, where he used to live.
Yeah, I think, he was Palisades. He wasn't even a McLean conservative. Like he actually lived in DC.
Hated by All the Right People, Tucker Carlson and the Unraveling of the Conservative Mind by Jason Zengerle. Jason, thanks for coming on the Gabfest. Good luck with the book.
Thank you. Thanks. I really appreciate it.
Now let's go to cocktail chatter. If you are having a cocktail party, Tucker Carlson is not there. So you don't feel the need to make stink eye at Tucker or have a jolly conversation with Tucker, but instead are talking to somebody else, John Dickerson. What are you going to be chattering about?
You may have noticed that, David, I think, Emily, you weren't here yet, but as we were all assembling here off stage, I was closing the windows in my room. That's because I was engaged in house burping. Do you guys know what this is? This is the Lüften, which is a German tradition of opening the windows daily, even during the winter, to air out houses.
All the windows?
All the windows for like 10 minutes and like maybe even multiple times a day. And I've been reading about this, but I hadn't been reading about the health benefits. And first of all, if you sleep with the windows open, there was apparently a study in 2021 that showed you snored and woke significantly less frequently. I can't imagine that would be the case in New York, where the streets are incredibly loud. A study in 2025 showed that CO2 concentrations in schools, when they were higher, which is to say the windows are closed, correlated with lower cognitive test scores.
Yeah. Have you ever read about astronauts? Astronauts, like, they're so stupid because they can't reduce the CO2.
Well, which is among the reasons that, of course, the moon landing was staged, because if it had been an actual trip to the moon, they would have been so blotto by the CO2, they wouldn't be able to make it to the moon. They wouldn't have made it to Poughkeepsie. Anyway, in 2025, another study found that older adults living in homes with better indoor air were less likely to experience depression compared to those with poorer ventilation. So I'm opening up the windows all the time because I am beset by a peanut cluster of maladies that can be swept away by the brisk breeze of the 4-degree temperature outside.
Great cocktail chatter, John. I have to have a conversation with my cohabitants of this house about this issue. Emily, what's your chatter?
I went to see the movie Hamnet last weekend, and I recommend it a lot, and then wanted to go back and read the Maggie O'Farrell book, Hamnet, that it's based on, one more time. I'm sure that I recommended that book at some point on this lovely Gabfest of ours because I'm such a fan of it. And then thirdly, of course, one can read Hamlet, the Shakespeare play, and think about how they all fit together. What jumped out at me about the movie, I mean, first of all, Jessie Buckley's performance as Agnes, Shakespeare's wife, she's just like this very vivid Earth Mother in this way that I was like totally drawn to. even when it didn't make total sense. And then the second thing is the idea that the ghost of Hamlet in the beginning of the play is about the grief from the parent of losing one's child, even though in the play it is obviously the father who is dead and not the child. I had not thought of that scene in that way before, and I really loved that. So anyway, go see the movie. It's in theaters, at least in Connecticut. And if not, I'm sure it'll be streaming sometime soon.
Is Paul Mescal continue to be the hottest man in the world?
He's super dreamy, but not really like the memorable performance in the movie, I would say, because Jessie Buckley is just like taking up the whole screen.
My chatter is about criminal justice. And in particular, I guess it's a Bazelon chatter. It's about criminal justice for people who do not shovel their sidewalk. And I wanted to discuss the different forms of not shoveling your sidewalk, because I now have a whole typology of the different ways in which people don't shovel their sidewalk. I live in a residential neighborhood of single family homes and some attached homes here in Washington. So the different ways people don't shovel their sidewalk. One is there's an absent owner. Like a surprising number of houses don't have someone who actually lives in them. No one's watching the house. So nothing is done. They just don't think to do with it, and they don't have someone who's tending the house. In a way, I feel this is the most forgivable form of not shoveling your walk.
Also, you're kind of asking someone to come break into your house when you do that. I always get really worried.
No, you make sure you've hired someone who's going to.
Well, I know, but if you haven't done that, then you're basically like
inviting. I see.
Yeah. And I would just add another category, which
that was my first category.
I know, but it's a subcategory to the one you just named, which is why I'm interrupting. Which is to say that there is a subcategory of owner who's not around, who nevertheless has workmen who come at surprise moments to do hammering at weird intervals, and that's what I live next to. So it's not only the no shoveling, but the damn renovation that's been going on forever. They deserve a special place.
Yes. Okay. So the one absent owner. The second is the person who has the corner house where they shovel the sidewalk on the side of the house that they use, but they don't shovel the sidewalk on the side they don't use. Now, this is a very common form of not shoveling. It's like they don't even. It's like, oh well, I've shoveled the sidewalk. It's like, I can clear a path in front of here. But like, dude, there's a whole other side of your house which maybe you never go there, but lots of us do. So that's the second kind.
Wait, this is like not the sidewalk
corner
in
lot.
Front of your house. Oh, the corner.
The corner lot. So everyone has a house on a corner lot. They use one.
Two. Yeah.
They have two sidewalks perpendicular to each other, but they only really use one generally. It's the one they go in and out of. And they just pretend the other one doesn't exist. The third kind, which is you shovel the path from your door to the street where your car is parked, and none of the sidewalk. And that is a form of, like, that person is probably in solitary for like 60 years.
And they shovel it in a way that is narrow, so narrow that it's basically just for their two boots.
Yeah. The third way, and I've seen this, actually I have a neighbor who did this. They literally shoveled their driveway so their car could get out, but not at all their sidewalk. That is pretty poor. Another is you shovel it, but you shovel it once, like before the snow is over, and you like just don't bother to go back. And so you leave like this incredibly treacherous thin layer of ice. And the final type is you shovel and you do a decent job, but you only shovel one shovel width, which is fine for a single person, but like not if somebody has a baby carriage, like if you and is carrying anything, like you have anything that is wider than a single body.
Or if two dogs need to cross. Important.
Last year, I have my wonderful neighbor, sent an email to the neighborhood listserv in which she listed all the houses that hadn't shoveled. I loved it. And she said, I will happily hire someone to come shovel your walk. Do I have your permission? But it was like just the act of naming all the houses was amazing. I asked her if she would do that this year. She said not. And the city in DC is not fining people because they've decided the ice is too thick to remove. But it's like the ice is too thick to remove because people didn't fucking bother to remove it when they could have.
I'd like to add to this conversation. First of all, in New York, they are quick on the draw in terms of fining because I was one of the previous snows. I didn't get out and shovel. I can't remember why. I didn't get out to shovel fast enough for the ticket guy. But here's a question. This time, because I track my health metrics, I went out and shoveled 14 times because you got to stay on top of it, or else you're gonna
You've had 11 heart attacks.
Yeah. But here's a question, a conundrum for you two. Okay, David, everything you say is correct and true, and so my shoveling conforms to your standards, which gives me some glee.
Which, of course, is all we want to be told.
Yeah, that's right, exactly. But here's a question. Okay, I don't own a car in the city. There are cars parked along the street. Am I responsible for shoveling a path? I've shoveled a wide path on the sidewalk, so I've taken care of the cement portion. But there's a portion between where the cement ends and the curb begins, and there's a car. Am I responsible for shoveling a path for the car owner who is not me on the space in front of my house?
Isn't that kind of a short space? Like, obviously you're not going to dig the whole car out. That I think we can all agree was above and beyond. But wouldn't that be pretty short, that extra several feet?
This is an important important fact to put in the record. I will answer it shortly.
Yeah, I think I don't think there's a clear answer to that, John. I think constitutional scholars have debated that really for 225 years, and they have not.
Putting your seat back on the airplane. Reasonable people can disagree, although not on this show, in which I'm the unreasonable one.
I felt like I was doing such a good job keeping my little patch clear in my 14 visits that I was sort of stirred by the sense of community feeling. And so I, in fact, did do it. As you say, Emily, it's not God's longest stretch of territory. So it wasn't, it took like 5 minutes. But I think it's kind of like, you're doing a solid to your neighbor. I think one should do it. I think it should be a norm, not a law. The sidewalk part, I guess, is a law because you get fined.
Then you feel virtuous. That's good.
Yeah, I know. And getting David to raise this so that I could trundle in that act of virtue was really.
There's the one kind of shoveling, the one kind of house where if you don't shovel, you're excused, is like if people are really old. And so, but it is then wholly incumbent on the neighbors to make sure that house is shoveled.
Now you're making me feel bad. I don't think we really offered enough to help the old people.
I'm saying it smugly because we totally shoveled.
He was encouraged,
like so clean.
I anoint you a knight for that.
I'm otherwise a pretty mediocre neighbor.
When we lived in Washington, we had a wonderful neighbor who was from Wisconsin, and he had a snow blower. And man, when that thing was, because we had some seriously heavy snows during that 25 years, and man, when that thing was going, it was such a clean lane.
And it's a disgusting form of loud pollution. I hate them so much. Up with leaf blowers. Sorry, John, to spoil your fun.
We had a snowblower neighbor, and he moved, and everyone's really unhappy because he used to do like wide swaths of the neighborhood. All right, listeners, I'm sure you have chatters, but they're not going to be as good as that one. This week's listener chatter comes from Kate Gase Walton, and it's but send your listener chatter to gabfest@slate.com if you have something you want to chatter to us about.
Hello, this is Kate Gase Walton calling from Bainbridge Island, Washington. For 20 years, my husband and I have spent Saturday mornings with our coffee and the Gab Fest, and it's become a hobby of mine to predict David's cocktail chatter. David, you and I like many of the same books. We also share an enthusiasm for singing in crowds, watching sports, and exploring obscure and wondrous places. Last week, I was quite sure you'd chatter about an astonishing new memoir, a book called Strangers by Belle Burden, about the abrupt and mysterious end of her 20-year marriage. Divorce memoirs are fraught, but I came away impressed by Burden's beautiful, measured writing and her courage. As a mom, I found myself agreeing that the book was important to write, not just despite her children, but in fact for her children. I think many GabFest listeners would appreciate it. Thanks for 2 decades of lovely Saturday mornings. Bye for now.
That memoir is fascinating. I have not read it, but I've read the New York Times column that sort of began part of it. It's like a crazy story. Email us at gabfest@slate.com with your chatter. We are not the only Slate podcast to listen to this week. Listen to Slate Money about Davos. Davos is so back. Felix and Elizabeth and Emily explain why Davos, hard to say Davos, why Davos felt so much more relevant this year. And Trump's unusual appearance at Davos. So check out the Slate Money podcast on Davos. That's all for our episode this week, but we also have a bonus episode in your feed. We're going to talk about the trial beginning for social media companies about whether they are harming kids by addicting them to Instagram and YouTube. That, however, is only for Slate Plus members. Slate Plus members get great stuff for their subscription, bonus episodes on the GabFest and other Slate podcasts. They get special discounts to live shows, like our live show coming up in DC. They never hit the paywall on the Slate site. So much more. So if you are a member, thank you. Enjoy it. If you're not a member, become a member today. Come on, just become a member today. You're probably snowed in. What else do you have to do? Just subscribe to the Slate Plus directly from the Political Gabfest show page on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, or visit slate.com/Gabfest Plus to get access wherever you listen. That is our show for today. The Gabfest is produced by Nina Porzucki. Our researcher is Emily Ditto. Our theme music is by They Might Be Giants. Ben Richmond, Senior Director for Podcast Ops. Mia Lobel is Executive Producer for Slate Podcasts. We were on an email chain this week, Mia and I, and we were both frustrated by that email chain because of how some other people were behaving on it. Hillary Fry is Editor-in-Chief of Slate. For Emily Bazelon, John Dickerson, I'm David Plotz. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next week.